All right, let's see how this goes. Yes, so as you said, I'm Sam Williams. I work for Quartz, which is, if you don't know, it's a global business news site. Our tagline is the guide to the new global economy. And I'm going to try to talk a bit today about the Quartz app that we launched back in February. I'm going to go over a little bit about how the app works, sort of how we create it and why, a little bit about how we actually get the content into the app, and also a bit about how the actual writing for the app every day is like. So yeah, this is what the app looks like, or more specifically, this is the inside of the app. It's pretty straightforward. We're trying to deliver you the news in the form of a conversational interface. We'll send you a couple of messages, give you a couple of options down below to respond back with, and then come back with those options are usually basically either a more info or skip to the next item or whatever. And really that's it. It's pretty straightforward. Doesn't seem too complicated, but really kind of to get to this point, it was anything other than uncomplicated. So yeah, when we started coming up with this, we wanted to do a native app for this. The whole point when we started, it was about a year and a half ago now, that we wanted to try to deliver. The whole concept was notifications, right, from the beginning. We wanted to try to get on users' home screens. We didn't know much else about what past that. The notification landscape for news at the time was more of the news it was more breaking news events that you would get a notification about, and really those notifications were like a title for what the article was that they were going to link to, with the expectation you would get more information as you went in. We felt like there was a good opportunity for us to try to come up with another solution to this, of trying to make the home screen, your lock screen, more interesting with notifications that really gave you everything you needed to know in that notification, instead of making you kind of go into an app and see if we could add some personality to it besides, right? So we went into it with that. We knew we wanted notifications, and the other thing we knew was that we didn't want to just copy our existing website. We have been spending a whole, when we launched in 2012, since then, since the very beginning, we've been trying to make a native, feel like a native experience, work on all different platforms, and be as responsive as possible. And it didn't really make sense to just try to copy it. It wasn't helping anybody out by doing the same thing in a native app. So that's what we knew. We knew from the start, basically those two things. Anything else, we didn't know what the inside. There was no requirement or anything of what the inside the app would be, and we'd have to figure it out. And honestly, at the beginning, this was one of the possibilities. We seriously talked about just having a blank screen where the entire experience was notifications, and that's it. And we talked about it would be a very easy option for us. We could throw it out right away. But in the end, it felt like a little bit of a cop-out, honestly, and we kind of wanted to challenge ourselves to see if we could come up with something else. So yeah, we started looking around to see what else we could do. On the left here, this is one option was just to do a timeline of all the notifications that we've sent out to the users that would have shown up on your lock screen. We tried cards that you could swipe between, because that's that's what you need to try when you're creating a news app, is cards these days. And those are fine. It wasn't super interesting to us, and we wanted to see what else there was. And so yeah, we started playing with this idea of a conversational interface, right? Wanted it would be an interesting challenge to see, can we actually deliver the news in this conversational interface and still be an interesting and engaging experience. So yeah, this is actually an early prototype at Jasper up at the top. That was actually our code name that we had when we first started working on the app, and we kept that up until just right before launch. So the content here, this is a totally functional working prototype that we built just to experiment to see if this would work, right? To get content for it, we wound up, our website at the time had what we called the brief, which was basically multiple news items all stacked together. It was like a title followed by a couple of paragraphs, and that was it. That was the whole thing, and it was a perfect fit to just throw in here and see, could we make this work, right? And we played around with it for a while. We had it installed on a number of our phones to see how this would work and tested with users, like internally, and it was really interesting, right? Like it definitely felt like we were getting somewhere, this could totally be possible. But the more we played with it, the more it became clear that this didn't really have much of a personality, right? Like it didn't really feel like we were having a conversation. It was clear the content wasn't written for the platform. It was written for something totally different. And it wasn't that entertaining of an experience in the end. And really, like, there's a million different ways you can get the news, like way more efficiently than this. And like to really make this work, to get people to actually come back to the app on a regular basis, it really needed to be as entertaining as it is informative in the end, right? So really, it became kind of clear that eventually we're going to have to just write all of this content for the platform to make it actually work, which means that we need to bring in writers, and we need to like figure out how the hell are we going to build like a native CMS for this sort of thing to create it. These are actually some mock-ups of once we decided we were going to do this and write it, kind of how this would actually work, or how it could look different ways. So, playing with this, we needed to figure out, like, are there any existing CMSs out there that we can use, so we don't have to, like, do a whole bunch of extra effort to create it. And really, kind of playing with this interface, it's clear this is like basically a choose your own adventure, right? But for news, or like more specifically, it's I can't remember the name of it. So it's basically a choose your own adventure. So like what kind of interfaces are out there for creating this kind of like chat interface with just buttons to tap to move on to basically point to the next message. So we went around, started digging around on the internet. This is kind of the go-to app for this sort of thing, or like one of the ones that people seem to like. It's called Twine. It's this interface we're doing. We brought on one of our writers, Adam Pasick, who's the lead writer for the team that writes for the app, and started kind of sketching out how this conversation might actually work, right? Figure out sort of what the flow of the conversation would be, and really see, is there any way that we could actually use this kind of interface to create this, like a news on, like, throughout the day, every day of the week for a team of like 6 or more people. And it's just super useful. It definitely helped us like figure a lot of things out, and it figured out that this wasn't actually going to work for us, right? It wasn't going to scale up. This is, far too confusing, way too many connections going on to actually like try to really write out and conceptualize as you're writing every single day about different things. Which means basically we're going to have to write this ourselves, right? Or I guess I'm going to have to write it myself for us. So started digging around. I kind of came up with some sort of guidelines of like when I'm creating this new CMS, figuring out how we're going to structure the data to get into the app. How are we going to actually build this thing? We knew some things that we knew going into it is we wanted this to be a news digest. It needed to go. We wanted the actual experience to end at some point. We didn't want it to just keep going on forever. We also wanted to make sure we didn't want to show the user the same thing twice, right? Like we should not show them the same news item multiple times. We know that they've already seen it. We can keep track of it, and it's just like respecting the user's experience and not do that. Also, we wanted to make sure that every time they came in, they were seeing the latest news that they could. So if they were in the middle of something before and they left like an hour earlier, when they came back there was something new, it needed to start off with the new thing and not just kind of continue where they left off before. Just as importantly as all of this needed to be simple for the writer, and they shouldn't have to worry about any of that, right? Like this should be as easy as possible to write, because coming up with like interesting and funny stuff is not easy to do, right? Like we need to get out of the way of them when creating a CMS and let them do what they do best, right? So, I won't dwell on this too much, but this is sort of how our data is structured in the end. So the idea is that this is an individual news item. I call them frames. And the idea is that it's multiple messages strung together with user actions that might, that will connect one, like a user action to the next message, or one user action stitch, or one message stitched to the next message. Very similar to like how Twine structures their data. The difference here is that like we have what created as like an additional user action that I call it the next frame user action, that is dynamic. So when the app sees that user action, it first, before displaying it, it first checks, are there any following frames to show the user? Are there new ones that they haven't read? Yes, there are. Go ahead, show that to them, and link it to that frame. So every user experience, depending on when they came in, could be slightly different, and you never really know which frame is going to follow the next one, just by timing of when they load it. So yeah, that's the JSON itself will take this. We take each frame, a script, which is the full like chat conversation, full digest. Each frame gets like inserted into this script, and that's what the app pulls down, that full response, and figures out what is left to read for the user. So this is the interface. It's not super pretty. I'm not a designer, but it's very functional for the writers. On the left there is the actual list of frames that compose the current script. They can drag and drop those around, edit, delete, or whatever. And then on the right-hand side here is the actual like editor for creating each of the individual news items or frames. When building this whole thing, it was really important because this type of writing is so totally different than what we're used to when creating the news, that it be as close to the actual like experience of the user as possible. So the writers don't need to like try to figure out in their own head what the user's going to experience. They're actually going to see it as they're writing it, and not have to think about it too much. Yeah, so this is what we do. We have about 6 or so people on our team writing this every day. We send out about we do about 4 updates throughout the day. Each update has about 3 new frames of news to do. So the goal is to have somebody come in, a user would come in about twice a day in the morning or afternoon and get a good like 5-minute update on what the current news is, and leave, and then want to come back later and continue to get those updates. I guess a few quick things that we've kind of learned along the way. Shorter messages are definitely better. So you don't want to have like a big, huge, long paragraph of content in there. It's much more conversational, really, right? Like if you just like look at your own chat, we would look at our own chats with family and friends, and it was clear like you weren't writing like full paragraphs of stuff. It's also important not to have too many in a row, because the content would like wind up scrolling off the screen, and you'd have to like scroll back before you could start reading, right? Obviously, liberal use of emoji and GIFs are a big plus. And actually, one of the things that we've run into, and is still kind of a challenge, honestly, is dealing with like breaking events that are constantly evolving over time. The way this, it's a very linear interface, and we're not going to go back and change the content for the user. And depending on if you have already read part of that news item as it was breaking, and events are changing over time, it could change. You want a different response than for somebody who's coming in fresh for like all brand new news. So we're kind of still playing with that. We've got a few ideas of what we're going to do, but it's still in the works. So yeah, that's the app. We're still chugging away. We've got an Android version that we're coming out with hopefully very soon. We just opened up a new position for an additional iOS developer, which is particularly exciting for me as the only person working on this. I will have finally somebody to help me out. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's doing well. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Sam Williams.